So, the people have spoken. Colombia's first round presidential elections took place yesterday, Sunday, May 31st, here in Colombia, and political outsider Abelardo de la Espriella took first place with over 10.3 million votes in yesterday's elections. Leftist Senator Iván Cepeda, an ally of current President Gustavo Petro, came in second with just short of 9.7 million votes. Paloma Valencia, the chosen acolyte of former President Álvaro Uribe, came in with less than 7% of the vote. A surprise for traditional Uribistas and people who at the beginning really saw her as the strongest contender, had just under 1.7 million ballots cast in her favor. Former Medellin mayor and Antioquia governor Sergio Fajardo got a hair over 1 million votes, and former Bogotá mayor Claudia Lopez got less than 1% with 225,000 votes. The other minor candidates together got just over 1% combined. Now, what will happen in Colombia is that, which I think is a positive aspect of the Colombian electoral system, is the top two vote getters. So Cepeda, no surprise there. Everybody, he's like the consolidated candidate on the left, will now face Abelardo de la Espriella in the final vote, which will be in about 3 weeks here in June. And I think that there are some interesting takeaways from this. De la Espriella is a political outsider. He, as far as I know, has never held any kind of political office. He has a very successful career as a defense attorney, representing a lot of high-end white-collar criminals. He has also kind of stepped outside of that box from time to time. There was a really awful case of a woman was attacked, some threw acid in her face, and he actually sort of served as a private prosecutor. And that's like when you're not satisfied with the job that the states or that the government's doing, or that their own prosecution, and so somebody comes in and files the charges as a prosecutor to make sure that from the standpoint of the victim, justice is served. And he actually successfully got a stronger sentence for the monster that threw acid in that young lady's face. I think he killed her, but anyway, De la Espriella came in and represented the family as victims and sort of served as a private prosecutor. But for the most part, he has defended people like Alex Saab. Alex Saab is the Colombian. He's born in Colombia, but he has worked very closely with Nicolas Maduro and the Venezuelan government to launder money in their CLAP program, and he's profited from that. And so the U.S. snatched Alex Saab when he was flying somewhere over in the Azores or Canary Islands or somewhere in the Atlantic, and brought him to the U.S. to serve, to face trial, and he was convicted, or he was in jail for all of these crimes that he was accused of, and probably, in my opinion, probably was guilty of. The Maduro regime in Venezuela has not only been very corrupt, but they have also been very repressive, and they have used deadly force to repress any kind of political dissent or opposition in Venezuela. But anyway, Espriella was Alex Saab's defense attorney. Saab also had some things that he was charges in Colombia. The Nule family, the Nule cousins who robbed Bogotá blind in the Carrusel de Contratos, which is when they built the and I'm oversimplifying it, but essentially they built, if you ever fly into Bogotá and you come out the airport, this big main road that goes to the airport. It's called El Dorado, Avenida El Dorado. And so they ripped the government, the country off blind in the contracting for that. And he was their defense attorney, and he's represented, I think, some people in the Clan del Golfo mafia. But anyway, it's interesting because then you have, Alvaro Uribe, who was the president. He served 2 terms in the early 2000s, and he really, along with Defense Minister Juan Manuel Santos, who later became president, broke the back of the FARC. Also, Uribe negotiated a peace agreement with the AUC paramilitary mafia, basically, back then. And after his 2 terms as president, he couldn't run anymore. He became a senator, and he's got this movement called Uribismo. His name is Uribe, so Uribismo is, it'd be like saying Trumpism or, something like, the followers of Uribe and his personality. But it looks like people are really tired of his movement. He's gotten convicted. And that's interesting because he actually tried to get charges against Iván Cepeda when they were both in the Senate. And the court, so if you're in the Senate, the prosecutor the regular prosecutors can't investigate you. The Supreme Court basically has to investigate you. And so they investigated these charges that Uribe leveled against Cepeda and decided that Uribe was lying. And he was the one who had done some corrupt things and tried to bribe some witnesses to testify falsely against Cepeda. And Uribe ended up convicted of this. Now, so Uribe's a convict. And that's, the definition, he's been convicted of a crime. So I'm not making, taking a statement. So, I don't want any impassioned people coming after me. He had been under house arrest for some time. Now, the judges have, since his conviction, let him out. But now the judges who let him out are under investigation for judicial corruption as we speak. Anyway, Uribe, who was very popular when he left office and really, in my opinion, has kind of destroyed his legacy because he was seen around the world. I remember before I lived in Colombia, and not really knowing all the little nuance of everything, he was seen as kind of the guy who made Colombia safe again, where you could visit and not get kidnapped and end up on the side of a milk carton, as we might say in the U.S. But a lot of his wrangling and political maneuvering and polemicism has largely destroyed that. He supported his defense minister, Juan Manuel Santos, to be president. Santos became president, who I think was an excellent president. But when Santos became president, he was like, thank you very much for your support. Now go and be retired and enjoy your horse ranches. Uribe has 2 horse ranches, one a few minutes from here and a much larger one up in, I think, Cordoba, up on near the Atlantic coast. But anyway, Santos didn't do what Uribe wanted him to do. Santos was like, I'm the president now. I'm going to be the president. I'm my own man. Thank you for your support. But I'm going to govern as I see fit. And Uribe was furious at this. Uribe was furious because he wouldn't do what Santos wouldn't do what Uribe said. Santos negotiated a peace agreement with the FARC that has not been fully implemented. And you can blame a lot of people for that. You can say that, one, there are a lot of people who are going to, Uribe supporters who are going to say it should never have been come into force in the first place because there was a plebiscite, a referendum, and people voted against it. Santos used political maneuvering to get it passed into law anyway. So then the next president was Iván Duque. Iván Duque came out of, actually, I won't say nowhere. He came out of Washington. So he's a Colombian, but he's, kind of running these diplomatic circles and think tank circles and these kind of non-governmental organizations and such. He really did not have a power base in Colombia. He didn't come from Congress, or he hadn't been a governor or mayor or any such thing. But Uribe just picked him to be the presidential candidate going back 7 years ago. And as Uribe's handpicked candidate, he won. So Iván Duque wins, and he kind of was a puppet of Uribe, and he really didn't have the charisma. I think he might have been a good foreign minister, but he really didn't connect with people. He did not have nobody liked him. He had no natural power base. His only power came from Uribe. And if you disagree with me, let me know. And so everybody sees him as a puppet, even his supporters, even the people who were in Uribe's movement. Maria Fernanda Cabal, who was a senator and very staunch Uribista, even called Duque a mamerto. So she's from his own party, insulting him. And his term, he finished extremely unpopular. He was very embittered. There's a great interview with BBC Hard Talk where you can listen to that interview and hear his frustration. And he basically complains and basically kind of in that interview decomposes into like a crybaby. I'm going to try to find the link and put it to you. And I'm not, I probably, if I'm not Colombian, I don't vote here. If I were, probably the first time I would have voted for him and probably have been very disappointed because so with the peace agreement, it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to reject it firmly or I'm going to implement it firmly. It just kind of muddled about. A lot of indicators really got worse during his term. The ELN and other groups started to rebuild. The mafia groups also started to strengthen. And so with that disaster, then things were so bad that Colombia elects its first ever leftist president. And I think a lot of that was a protest because the Duque administration had done such an awful job. And I'm saying this as an independent observer, who was here the entire term of the Duque president, here way before that as well. And you cannot honestly say that presidency was successful in any aspect. He finished with something like a 30% approval rating. But anyway, that paves the road for Gustavo Petro, the current president, to get elected. So Gustavo Petro's in there, and he's this big former guerrilla. So he's a former fighter. He spent time in prison for kind of like holding arms, keeping arms for their M19 armed guerrilla movement. That was a violent, bloodthirsty guerrilla movement that he was part of. They killed people and they kidnapped people and they extorted people and all this stuff. Anyway, that's a different podcast or different episode. But so Petro gets in there and people are like, okay, we're tired of this clown show, so let's see what this guy can do. That hasn't gone so well. It has not been as bad as the worst case scenario that a lot predicted. Colombia has not turned into Venezuela. The rule of law has held. Most of Petro's kind of furthest out there initiatives have been stifled by Congress to some degree. But his soft on crime, soft on guerrillas, being a former guerrilla, he's a sympathizer with them, really hasn't resonated with people. So there are those people that want to continue his project, and those are your Iván Cepeda supporters. But what we see now is that people are saying, look, at least a majority of people are saying, we don't want this, a continuation of this neo-Marxist project that Petro has and that Cepeda has helped to create. But we're tired of Uribe and his stuff. You know, he's old, his people the people who support him are, to a large degree, elderly, and who remember when he was president, and maybe in some cases, especially around here in Antioquia, have a even a personal connection with him. But they're rejecting Uribe and Uribe's Uribismo and his movement. They're like, look, dude, you've had your chance. You were president. Okay, you gave it to him real good with the FARC and such. But then we had the Iván Duque presidency, and we're tired of your kind of cult of personality and puppet politicians. I don't know that Paloma, who came in third place, would have continued that, but that, I think, is the suspicion with a lot of people, being the Uribe kind of chosen candidate. Now, this map is interesting because it shows where Espriella won versus where Cepeda won. Cepeda took Bogota, and Bogota has traditionally tended to the left outside of the upscale neighborhoods on the north side of the city. So you have large, I won't call them, they're not all slums. There's some areas that are, I guess you would say, solid blue collar neighborhoods that are not awful. But you have this big mass in Bogota on the south, especially on the south side of the city. There's some in other parts. There's some up north and some kind of on the western fringe of the city as well. But you have these large low-income areas and where kind of a left-wing populist message might resonate. But you also have Universidad Nacional, the National University, which is kind of even though academically it has a very strong record. What happens in Colombia is, to get into some of these universities, these public universities, it's extremely competitive. It doesn't cost almost anything to go. It's practically free or almost free. But you have to take these very competitive entrance exams to get in. And so you end up with a lot of very smart poor people who go there, and a lot of them are capitalists, and a lot of them, I'm not saying that if you're smart and poor, you're going to be on the left, but the university, especially Universidad Nacional, has gotten this big, I don't know the history of how this has happened. I don't know the details. It would be interesting to study that, but it's this bastion of Marxism. And if you go to the university, there's this big mural of Che Guevara, the bloodthirsty Argentine guy who helped Castro and, killed a lot of people. A lot of people don't realize he's from Argentina. He's because he did a lot of his stuff with Castro in Cuba, but he's not Cuban. And his name is Ernesto. Che is like a nickname that people outside of Argentina give Argentinians because Argentinians will call you, say, hey, Che, which is like, in Cuba they might say acere, like to call you. And, but anyway, Che is like that's just that. It's like a demonym. It's a slang demonym. But Ernesto is got this big mural of him on the wall. And so it's kind of a hotbed of, there's these, and this is just true, there's these, not everybody who goes there is like some kind of Marxist, okay? But it's where the Marxists like to congregate. And you have these kinds of not only that one, but there's a teachers' university. It's called Universidad Pedagógico, I think, which is the pedagogic university of in Bogota. Is another one. I used to live near it, and they would come out and when I've lived in Bogota for a year, and they would just like come out and, not every student. I'm sure that some of the students was like, look, I just want to be a teacher. I don't want to do anything. But they would like come out and close Avenida Chile, and they'd be out there throwing rocks and tearing up everything. And I'm like, what are they mad at? And I would ask teachers who I know, and they're like, like nobody, they're just told to protest. And so they go out there and protest. And that's not really the best answer, but nobody seemed to know, at least the people I could reach. to find out what was going on. On the other hand, aside from what happened in Bogota, in Medellin, in Antioquia, where Medellin is the capital, they went more than 2-1 for De La Espriella, so more than double the votes went for De La Espriella. It's interesting because Medellin and the areas around Medellin, Antioquia more broadly, is the bastion of traditional Uribismo, but they really went hard for De La Espriella. Coffee country to the south of Antioquia, so you're talking about Caldas, Risaralda, and Armenia, down where Pereira is, and Manizales, they went for Espriella. The Caribbean coast went for Cepeda, but it's interesting because they also had a presidential candidate who didn't really get any significant support. Caicedo, who was the mayor of Santa Marta, and he's like a far left guy as well. So the other thing about the Caribbean coast, maybe you could argue, except for Barranquilla, is that it has suffered a lot from corruption. Some areas have suffered from a lot of historic violence and like organized violence I'm talking about. And it has been neglected. In Colombia, it kind of reminds me sometimes of that movie, The Hunger Games, because you have like Bogota and Medellin that are world class, and you could live here like you're living in, Stockholm or London or Tokyo or Miami or New York. You got all the, quality of life goodies. But you go to other places and it's just neglected, okay? And a lot of the Caribbean falls into that category. You might have visited, let's say you go to Cartagena, and you've got all the tourist stuff and the old city and Boca Grande and the beaches and blah, blah, blah. All right, but most people have never really even been into the real Cartagena. And I say the real Cartagena, that all is part of Cartagena, but if you go beyond the airport and go beyond that little fringe that's up there on the Caribbean coast and go down into the city, or go to the Basurto market, for example, it's a whole different side that a lot of foreigners and tourists never see. And it's sad because Cartagena could be a great city, and I'm not saying that with disrespect to any Cartageneros out there, but there's a vast difference between what the tourists see and the other part of the city where kind of everyday life takes place. Okay, where it's not tourist oriented like Boca Grande, where people own their second condos and that kind of thing. Barranquilla has a lot of industry. Santa Marta suffers from a lot of corruption. Places like Cienega, and the Caribbean has traditionally lacked the infrastructure and investment that other areas have. You also have a big income disparity of the bananeros, who, like the banana growers, who own these big estates, and then the people who work there who make not a lot of money at all. Okay, so the coast, if you look at the map, the coast, then we look at the Pacific coast. The entire Pacific coast has gone for Cepeda again. Chocó, for example, entirely neglected department. Most of the Pacific coast has been neglected. Down in Nariño, down towards the Ecuador border, they're suffering from violence. Okay, they're suffering from the ELN and the FARC and those guys. And then if we go over into the rainforest or jungle areas towards the border with Peru and Brazil, again, you see that those areas have gone for Cepeda, but those areas are also extremely sparsely populated. So you have an area like Amazonas that's huge. It's like bigger than some countries, the entire department, but it might only have like 50,000 people, okay, because it's mostly just empty jungle, literally. And so one interesting observation down there is Caquetá, which is also very sparsely populated, but they're suffering from guerrilla violence, when I'm talking about ELN and FARC, they went for De La Espriella. So to me, that might say, look, we're sick of this violence and we want you to do something about it, okay? And not Petro's soft on crime, love thy criminal policies, and that really is what they have been. And Iván Cepeda has been the main kind of co-architect and leader of Petro's Paz Total initiative in the Colombian Senate or in the Colombian Congress, okay? So people who are tired of this Paz Total, which means total peace, and who think it's a farce, and I think it is because it's failed. If it worked and if it reduced crime or if it reduced the presence of these armed groups, then fine. Okay, you want to try different tactics? Okay, in the U.S., when they had that 3 strikes you're out and all that tough on crime stuff that started during the Clinton administration, it's failed. It's put a lot of people in jail, but and the war on drugs and all these different things. And again, I'm not trying to get into a big policy discussion, but if we analyze things, the statements that I think are being made, like Norte de Santander, up on where Cucuta is, up on and Catatumbo, up on the Venezuelan border. Catatumbo is a lawless region, and I think the people who voted for De La Espriella are saying, we're tired of this, okay? We're tired of the same old, and we want a different direction. And there's no longer that nostalgia for Uribe that existed. And I think also that the old people who liked him are just kind of aging out of things. And the young people he was president 20 years ago. And the people who don't have any, and then before that, he was the governor of Antioquia. And then before that, he was the mayor of Medellin. He also spent time running Aerocivil, which is like the FAA of Colombia, the aviation administration. Those hardcore Uribe supporters are kind of aging out. And there's people who are saying they're not necessarily left-wing people or left-wing sympathizers, but they don't feel like the only choice is to go with Uribe. Now, De La Espriella has no congressional constituency, so we can expect Congress to continue to be a strong check on executive power, largely what we have seen during the Petro administration. Petro came with all these ideas. He's going to take over the private pension systems and put that money in government control, which scares anybody with a pension. Well, not anybody. Some people like it, but he's been trying to take over the health system and make it into kind of a single payer system. He's been thwarted with that. And it's left Colombia in kind of this limbo situation because he's been able to kind of and not by himself. That's an oversimplification to say he's clogged up the EPS system, but there has been a lot of uncertainty. The government's taken over a couple of the EPS systems. He put Daniel Quintero in charge of this, which is kind of amazing because Quintero is facing indictment for something like 40 charges from his time as mayor of Medellin, and may end up in jail. He had to move to Bogota because he got run out of Medellin. Literally, the people in Medellin, he couldn't go out on the street, or his family. And he said this, this isn't gossip. He said, I have to move because these people don't respect my family, because he's so disliked and kind of hated in Medellin. He ran when his cousin-in-law, his wife's cousin, ran for mayor to continue his project. He got like the worst showing. He had like 11% of the vote. Okay. And then the other guy, Fico, ran again and is back in the mayor's office of Medellin. And he got something like it was like 70% to 11 or something. Now, this is key. We still have one more round. What happens, remember, is we had this kind of free for all first round where you had 7 or 8 different people on the ballot. And now the top 2 vote getters go to the final round, the final countdown, the final round, and I think it's June 21st. It's like in 3 weeks. And what are we going to see? We're going to see mass mobilizations, busloads. So the Cepeda movement, what they like to do, and it's not really him, but just kind of how that Colombia Humana and Pacto Histórico, that whole Petrista movement works, is they'll go and mobilize people. So they'll probably have mingas, and a minga is so you have these indigenous or American Indian communities, and they live out on resguardos, these basically Indian reservations. And they get on these big Chiva buses, and whoever the leaders that organize this, and they'll come, and maybe because they're upset at something and they're mad at the government, so they'll come and take over a town square or advocate for what they want. And nothing wrong with that. But anyway, what'll happen though, and especially because, and forgive me if I pronounce her name wrong, but I think Ada Kilche, but Cepeda's running mate, who will be the vice president, is a native indigenous activist person. And so we can expect that those groups that support Cepeda will organize and do mass mobilizations. That's to say they bust you to the polls and mobilize and get you out there. That way, you can probably see, and it's not going to have the same kind of character because they don't get people in buses or anything like that. But business groups will be telling their members, hey, you got to get out there and go vote because the communists are coming. Paloma Valencia and Uribe's camp has already come out firmly behind Abelardo de la Espriella. So the right is now unified. You can ask what's going to happen with kind of the center. So you're talking about people like Fajardo and people like Claudia Lopez. I doubt they might just not endorse anybody. I would be surprised if they endorse Cepeda, but it's kind of a up in the air type of thing. Who's going to be more motivated? The Petristas, the people who like Petro, or the Uribistas, the people who like Uribe. Cepeda and the left-wing people. Now, we can already sort of count his votes because the people who have voted for him, that's your base. All right. Now we've got a combination of the Uribistas who voted for Paloma and the people who have voted for Abelardo de la Espriella. An important and interesting observation is that neither of the two traditional parties in Colombia are even players in this. I'm talking about the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party. Both of those still exist. They are parties in Colombia. And I think that this political plurality that Colombia has is a good thing. I think that we can learn from it in the U.S., because we have this duopoly. And Colombia, for most of its history, has had a duopoly, and you had the Liberal Party, and that's what they're called, and the Conservative Party. And they would go back and forth, going back, to the time of Santander and Simón Bolívar, really. And those were kind of like the two intellectual authors of the different movements. One is like the God and country and church and all this kind of stuff. And the other one is kind of like separation. I mean, they were never really leftist in today's idea of the word, like Marxist or anything like that, but a strong separation of church and state, a rule of laws versus a rule of men and strong men and caudillos. A caudillo is like a strongman dictator or a personality, okay? Not a big personality, but we're going to have a republic where the laws are strong and people have to work within those, okay? So campaigning is going to be intense. I expect it to be colorful. I'm very happy to report that there was not any major violence during yesterday's electoral violence. They caught some people who were maybe had some cash. What they'll do is like they'll try to buy your votes. Not so much in the big cities. Sometimes they'll do this, especially up on the Caribbean coast. But like in the country and small countryside and small towns, they'll do things like that. But some people were caught with that. But you didn't see like any headline level massacres or bombings of political like voting places or such. Even the ELN had come out and said that they were going to pledge to put a halt to their violent activity while people voted. And so very nice of them, right? Now, so remember, we still have one more round to go. Anything can happen. It will be interesting to me to see what Cepeda does to try to reach out to those people who do not support him. Okay, does he tone down his kind of Marxist sympathizing platform, which I'm not being pejorative. I mean, the guy, that's what he likes. I mean, he studied in Warsaw Pact, Bulgaria. His family comes out of that. His father, I think, who was assassinated when he was in the Unión Patriótico, which is a party that was like a FARC adjacent party. But anyway, how is he going to reach out to the moderate people? That's going to be interesting to see. And also what Abelardo de la Espriella does as well, to see what they do, how they campaign to not only keep their own people who already supported them motivated, but how they reassure and convince those people that are not on either side to support them. If nothing changes, Abelardo wins. Okay, so who wins and who loses? What happens if Abelardo de la Espriella wins, and what happens if Iván Cepeda wins? Let's look at business groups, the major gremios, which are business organizations like ANDI and FENALCO. And these are like, in the U.S., you could think of them as like the Chamber of Commerce. These are like nonprofit organizations that support the business people. So if you're a small business owner, they'll say, hey, come and join our organization and we represent you, the small business person. Now, they also have major companies and big giant factories that are members as well. But it's kind of like the Chamber of Commerce business support groups. They don't officially endorse anybody, but you can tell from their behavior and their past relationships. They booed Daniel Quintero, who I mentioned off stage. But he kind of crashed it. He showed up and like just went up on stage and tried to, he does these stunts and tried to create a scene. Petro and them have kind of been at odds, kind of is an understatement. I think they either didn't invite him to one of their conventions or he chose not to go. I think we might have reported on it a couple years back. But the business groups, I'm going to be surprised to see any major business group come out with an endorsement for Cepeda, but you may see that. The teachers union, there's a main big teachers union, FECODE, and FECODE is like, they're a union, but they're also more than that because they're kind of like a strong far left movement that will get involved in stuff that has nothing to do with teachers or teachers' pay, and anything that's like, you could say like, a Petro statist idea, they really get behind and support, and they mobilize their teachers to come out. Now, I don't think that most teachers are necessarily kind of lockstep whatever the union says. Okay, you're going to have some hardcore ones, and other people are just like, I'm a teacher. I know we have people that are former teachers on our staff, and they just are like, yeah, I'm a teacher, but those people are nuts. Now, there's other people, again, that's going to be, oh, FECODE represents us and all this kind of stuff. And so you're going to see the union structure and some other unions as well come out and just lockstep support Cepeda, but the rank and file are going to be more diverse in their political opinions and actions. Healthcare providers, unless you are for a single payer, which is what Petrismo, the Petro movement, has been trying to institute in Colombia. Anybody that has healthcare outside of that, and the healthcare provider, so if you're a doctor, for example, and you want to charge people, or if you're a hospital or something, then if you don't want to become a government employee or to only go to the government, then you're going to support De La Espriella. If you want healthcare to be completely run by the government, then you will support Cepeda. Now, Colombia has some very uneven healthcare, but some very good healthcare. And it depends on a lot of factors where you are. Obviously, if you have money or not. There's a lot of medical tourism, people that come to Colombia to get procedures done and to get treatment. And the EPS systems. So basically you have these, they're kind of like what you would call a PPO or HMO in the US. They're these entities. And what happens is, like, if you're an employee, then the employer pays these entities, and then these entities sort of pay the like the hospital or the clinic or a doctor or whoever. And some are very well run and some are very poorly run. I have Sura. Sura's great, okay? But then there's some other ones out there, Savia Salud, and they're insolvent. And I don't know if that's the one, so forgive me if I misspoke. But there's some different ones out there, and some of them are in better financial situations than others, and they get to the point to where they're not paying the doctors and people because they're not getting the money, or they're mismanaging the money. And then there's also government benefits. So in the U.S., we have something called Medicaid, which is if you're poor, that's what you get, and they pay for the doctor. In Colombia, they have something called Sisben, and it will help with things like, okay, I can't afford to pay anything and I'm unemployed, so I don't have my EPS. Okay, you're going to be able to get some benefits through something like Sisben. But Petro and Cepeda and that movement wants to go to all your health care comes from the government. Okay. Now, anyway, whatever you think about that, that's kind of, if you are a doctor or clinic or hospital, and you want to go to the government system, then you'll like Cepeda. If you want to kind of be your own business or provider, then you will oppose him and ostensibly go for De La Espriella. Petroleum, big winner under De La Espriella, big loser under Cepeda. Petro has blocked new petroleum exploration and licensing in Colombia, and Espriella has said that he will restart that with no ifs, ands, or buts. Okay, Cepeda will probably continue what we have had under Petro, which is basically a shutdown of any kind of growth or expansion of the petroleum industry. No new drilling, no new exploration, divestiture. Now, the problem with that is that Colombia has relied on petroleum as its primary source of foreign exchange. So Colombia needs dollars. The government needs dollars to pay bonds, and it gets those dollars from foreign exchange, from petroleum, other things, but petroleum has been the biggest provider of these funds to the government. Now, Ecopetrol, the Colombian state-controlled oil company, also owns oil fields in the Permian Basin and the U.S. and Texas. They've got rigs and they own oil fields up in the Gulf and these other areas. And right now, because of all this chaos that's happening over in the Middle East and in Iran, oil prices have shot up. Colombia has gone from where it could have benefited from these high prices and been selling oil on the market and bringing in a cash windfall, because they have prevented any new natural gas production. Colombia has to now import natural gas at these higher prices just for existing demand. So there's programs to get your taxi drivers, your taxi cabs to move over to natural gas because it cleans burner than gasoline or diesel, right? But so they get everybody to switch over to natural gas, and then they don't produce the natural gas. So now these taxi drivers and people, there's trucks and garbage trucks and all these things that run on buses that run on natural gas. Now the prices have shot up for them, okay? And people, okay, you say we want to protect the environment. Well, the people, the poor people that Petro and Cepeda are supposed to love so much, now they finally are getting natural gas run to their house. And even before they've used these tanks, they bring the tanks out to you with natural gas in them for your stoves and for cooking. If they can't afford natural gas, they're going to go back to deforestation. They're going to go back to burning wood for cooking and such. Where's the wood come from? You go out there out back and chop down the trees. Okay. And so we have deforestation of the Amazon, the rainforest over in Chocó, and then the sparsely, there's not a lot of trees up in the Atlantic coast. Okay. It's more like a savanna or desert if you get over there by La Guajira. So anyway, petroleum industry wins under De La Espriella, loses under Cepeda. You may like that. You may be anti-petroleum, but that's what you have. Mining industry. Petro has been mildly hostile to the mining industry. It's continued. He's kind of let it. He hasn't directly assaulted it like maybe he has with petroleum. But again, mining industry wins with De La Espriella, loses with Cepeda. Okay, the BPO, the tech, the call centers. I think that one hint you can take is that at the CX Summit, which is the big BPO and contact center industry convention that takes place in Cartagena every year. I go every year. They don't come out and endorse anybody, but Alvaro Uribe's son was an invited keynote speaker. So you can take that, if you will, as a subtle, indirect endorsement. If I'm wrong, you can argue with me on that. But I think that when you look at, for example, Gustavo Petro raised the minimum wage by 16% one year, and then the next year, 23%. Okay. And you can say, well, that's great. The problem is, if you look more closely at what happens in Colombia and developing economies, is that about half the workforce works in the informal economy. Okay. That's to say, you work at the corner store and they just pay you in cash. All right. Or you work out on a field in a farm somewhere, you're picking avocados or something, and they just pay you in cash. What happens is then when you're in the informal sector, you don't get the benefits of the EPS, like I just explained, the health system benefits. You don't get, you're not saving for your pension, no employer's contributing to your pension. And a lot of times it's not because the employer's evil, it's just because the load, what it costs to employ somebody in Colombia is so costly and restrictive. So what happens, let's suppose you have a restaurant and maybe you own this little, tiny shack of a restaurant or roadside stand, or you're cooking like they do around here where I live. They like cook sausages on the side of the road. And the Antioquia sausages, or chorizos antioqueños, are very famous, and they're locally around here. People are real proud of them, kind of like the choripans down in Argentina. They're really proud of them. And they're good. I like them. They're nice sausages. But anyway, well, you got to know where to go, because some people don't know what they're doing. If you get somebody who's a maestro and knows how to make them, they're great. But anyway, so there is you want more people in the formal workforce, because then you are able to collect taxes on the employer and the employee if they make enough. They are contributing to the healthcare system. They are contributing to their own pension savings and such, rather than if they're just somebody getting paid in cash somewhere under the table. If you own like one of these little sausage stands, like I was saying, what happens? You might only work 3 hours a night. You might only work because you get off work and then you come and fire this up. I remember when I got back, I was 3 weeks in the U.S. and I was like, man, I want a sausage. And we leave the airport and I'm in this hired driver, and I didn't even wait till I got home. I was like, take me to a sausage stand. And right there, leaving the airport, if you've ever been to the Jose Maria Corredor, there's this guy out there with the cart. He and his girlfriend or wife, and they've got this cart with these hot sausages. And so he's not out there 24 hours a day. He's not some business with any kind of, big tax plan and corporations and papers and all this stuff like that. But the thing is, if he wanted to employ somebody formally, the law as it is in Colombia right now is so restrictive, you can't employ somebody part-time. You can't legally. Okay. So, hey, I'm going to run this stand and I need some help. I'm going to have a restaurant that's only open for dinner. You can have a restaurant that's only open for dinner, but you must pay your employees based on a full-time 40-hour work week. You can't say, I'm going to pay you for half a time or 20 hours a week or 10 hours a week, or I only want to work on Sundays. It's illegal in Colombia. Okay. Now, if you want more of those kinds of restrictions, and maybe you do, maybe that's your philosophy, let me know in the comments. If so, if you think that that's a good idea, then you're going to like Cepeda. Okay. On the other hand, I mean, it's really not legal. There's no real direct legal way in Colombia to work two jobs, for example. Okay. Like a lot of people do in the U.S. where I'm from, or Canada, or wherever, where, okay, I'm going to work my 9-to-5 job and I want to work because I want to save money or whatever, your own reasons. You can't in Colombia like work, let's say 8 to 5, and then go and work in a restaurant 6 to 10 p.m. Well, you can, but you can't do it legally, and everybody does it. Okay. But it's all strictly speaking, illegal. Okay. Now, if you want that, so the BPO sector, tech sector, call center sectors, if you have a contract, let's say you're a call center operator, okay, and your contract, I'm charging, $15 a seat, or FTE, like they say in the business. And all of a sudden, the government just says, we're going to raise the wages on everybody 23, not 5 or 10%, but 23%. Okay. If you go back to your client, like whoever's, paying you to operate the call center for them, the customer support, and you say, okay, I'm going to raise my prices on you 23%, they're probably going to leave Colombia and go to a different jurisdiction. Okay, well, that's just priced Colombia out. So let's go to Honduras, or let's go to Jamaica, or let's go to Dominican Republic, or let's go to I don't know, Guatemala, where they're operating these types of businesses, or Mexico, because you just increased your surprise, and it's a big surprise to 20, not based on the increase in, let's say, it's one thing if Colombia has like super high inflation and then you end up really paying the same in dollars, but that's not what happened. Basically, what's happening is Petro is like, I'm just going to, the evil capitalist business owners, they're rascally rich people. So we're going to we're with the workers. So we're going to just raise their wages by 20% because, yeah. All right. Well, okay. So now when the 500 seat call center shuts down, those people who had 100% formal employment contributing into everything, it's like, oh, thank you. All right. We have work, dignified work, but we lost our job. All right. So anyway, now maybe you're like, yeah, we like that. If you like that, Cepeda's your guy. If you don't like that, Espriella is your guy. Relationships, foreign relationships. The USA, Colombia will get back to probably a generally positive allied relationship with the United States. Abelardo is kind of like the kind of guy who says crazy stuff, sort of like Trump. So they personally probably will get along just fine. Actually, I think Abelardo de la Espriella might be a U.S. citizen, as well as holding Italian citizenship, as well as Colombia. I've heard that he owns property, like has a house in Florida somewhere. But yes, Colombia will generally have a productive relationship with the United States. We can expect that. With Cepeda, who's kind of, I don't think that he would do like Petro and go out there and say crazy stuff like Petro tried to tell U.S. troops to rebel against the executive branch, which was just stupid. But I don't. Cepeda is a lot smarter, I think, than Petro and things like that. So I think that with Cepeda, there would be. I don't think that he would go out of his way to destroy the relationship, but I don't think that Cepeda is any kind of fan of the U.S. and would probably work to reduce the U.S.'s influence in Latin America generally. Let's look at neighbors. So you have kind of a sort of a left-wing executive branch right now in Brazil. Brazil, even though Brazil is a neighbor of Colombia, there's not a whole lot of trade that goes back and forth. You can't, if you want to cross over into Brazil, you've got to, you can fly, but like there's no bridges or anything like that. You can take a boat down there by you have to cross over the Amazon River. But I doubt that there would be a lot of changes. I think that when it comes to Venezuela, Cepeda would continue to be an ally with the sort of socialist government that's there now, the continuation of Nicolas Maduro and Hugo Chavez, though we do see that the Venezuelan government has been more compliant with trying to not battle too much with the U.S. So relationships with Venezuela will probably worsen, but I don't expect to see any kind of crises or anything to that effect. Ecuador, they've been having kind of a pissing match with the two presidents because you have this guy who's kind of on the right who got elected in Ecuador, and Petro doesn't like him, and so they've been battling, and businesses are the ones suffering because they're raising tariffs on each other And it's like, we have 100% tariffs on you, and oh, we have 100% tariffs on you. So Petro and the Ecuador government have been fighting, so we can expect that to calm down or to go away under De La Espriella. Under Cepeda, I think that Cepeda would work to keep that productive and not be so polemic, and things would probably be on neutral footing. Peru, they changed government so fast. I saw Keiki Fujimori is back in the running. So I think whoever's the next president in Colombia, we're going to see 6 more presidents in Peru. So go figure. Panama, generally peaceful relationships. Panama currently has kind of a U.S. friendly, right tilting, not anything crazy, but right tilting government. So again, with Cepeda, expect there to be a high level of cooperation, but I don't expect with Cepeda, I don't expect there to be any crises, but with Espriella, I expect there to be more cooperation between Panama and Colombia. The travel sector, I think that directly they're not affected in the sense of both candidates want to promote tourism to Colombia. What I think happens with travel and with tourism is that the big break on travel and tourism is if crime increases and Colombia becomes unsafe like it used to be. And right now there are places in Colombia. 5 years ago, I drove from Medellin to the Caribbean coast, up through Santa Rosa de los Osos and up through Valdivia and that area. It's not as safe as it used to be. I don't know if I would do that today. It's getting worse. Okay, down in Jamundí, south of Cali, I visited and thought, well, this is a wonderful place. We could live here. That was 20 years ago, maybe more than 20 years ago. Today, Jamundí is kind of a mess. It's dangerous. Okay, there are areas that are being shut off, not just to international tourism, but to domestic tourism. And so the travel sector will suffer if the security situation continues to worsen. My take is that Cepeda would be softer on guerrillas and these criminal groups. Maybe not the traditionally right-wing mafias, but certainly on the ELN and the FARC dissidents. Cepeda would probably be softer on them, and so we would see larger swaths of Colombia become tourism no-go zones like it was in 1980 or 1990, more like 1990, right? The guerrillas and mafia groups, like I just said, now you can argue that he has defended mafia groups as a defense attorney. He's come out there and said that I'm doing my professional role as a defense attorney, but I want to get rid of these groups. And so, the poor, well, Cepeda is going to argue that we are for the poor and we're going to do things like raise minimum wage and all this stuff like that. And if that's your philosophy, then fine. De La Espriella is really going to probably say, not to put words in his mouth, that we're going to create more business opportunities and more jobs for you and make it safer in these areas that are controlled by mafias, because the mafias run the poor neighborhoods, not the rich neighborhoods. And so those are the winners and losers based on the winners and losers of the elections. Now, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. And remember, it ain't over. We got the final runoff in 3 weeks, and we'll see what happens. So stay tuned, and we will keep you updated as events progress and evolve. And don't forget to like and don't forget to subscribe. And if you disagree with anything that I have said, let me know, please, in the comments. Talk to you soon.